אוויר הרים צלול כיין, בריח אורנים, נישא ברוח הערביים עם כל פעמונים. ובתרדמת אילן באבן, שבויה בחלומה, העיר אשר בדד יושבת ובליבה חומה. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. איך יבשו בורות המים, כיכר השוק ריקה, ואין פוקדת הר הבית בעיר העתיקה. ובמערות אשר בסלע, והלילות רוחות, ואין יורד אל ים המלח בדרך יריחו. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, אך בבואי היום לשיר לך ולך לקשור כתרים, קטונתי מצעיר בנייך ומאחרוני המשוררים, כי שמך צורף שירייך אני
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to this week's Torah study. This is Hakham Melech Ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, and we are going to be continuing our studies. Shabbat Shalom Yarden, Shabbat Shalom Mar Yanana Miknana Benana, and we are going to be continuing our studies in Leviticus chapter 21 today, and we'll get into that in a little while. We'll look a little bit at the book of Job first, and we'll see what we can learn from it. Very, very interesting book. If you've never read through the book of Job, then I highly recommend it. And if you don't have time to read through it, then you can listen to it online. If you just type in NIV Job or NIV any book, then it'll bring up a link to YouTube video where you can listen to it. And that's what I do a lot of times when I'm in the car, or if I'm cooking food or something like that. I'm listening to the Tanakh. Great way to learn the Tanakh. You can find it in English, you can find it in Hebrew. A little bit hard to find in English and Hebrew, but it's out there. So yeah, that's about it. So welcome to the study. Let's see, is there anything that I have to say this week? I'm here in Katzrin in the Golan Heights. Very much enjoying myself here, steadily integrating myself into the community here, mostly at this point, the English-speaking community. Not because I don't speak fluent Hebrew, I do, but I just feel more comfortable being around people with a shared background of coming from the United States or English-speaking countries. So usually I'm always on Shabbats, basically. Well, not usually, sometimes I'm not in Katzrin. Whatever I am, then I'll go to the Beit Knesset here and I'll pray with them. And it's funny because there's so many weird things I see in the prayer service of the Rabbanim that I don't agree with. But I'm not there to tell them what to do or what not to do. But it's funny because they consider us the heretics. They consider us the ones who are, have left Judaism. And it's just so ironic. There's a is it on I believe it's on, when is it? It's with Kol Nidrei. So it'll be on Yom Kippurim, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I have to remember back to my rabbinical services, where before they start the rabbinical service, they say a little statement, which is something like that we allow ourselves to pray with sinners, right? So anyone who's at the Yom Kippur service, is allowed, even if they've committed sins over the past year. And when they say that, probably one of the things that was intended, or perhaps one of the things that was intended by the original writers of that phrase or that statement, are including people like us, the Karaites, that they're, even if we're a Karaite, even if we don't believe in the quote unquote oral law, and I've said many times, the phrase oral law is just a marketing ploy. It would be like me calling it a beat up, 2003 Chevrolet, I don't know, a rocket ship or something like that. It's a marketing ploy. there's no such thing as the oral law. It's just that that's what the rabbis call their interpretations of the Torah, which they pretty much invented, I won't say out of thin air, because they were heavily influenced by the surrounding cultures, Babylonian culture, Greek culture, Roman culture later on. And but they call it the oral law. It's a marketing ploy because they have to explain why for 1,000 years the people of Israel never kept any of these elements of their form of Judaism, and so they have to make up this lie. Well, there's no written record of it because it was passed down orally. Well, even things that are passed down orally, there will be written records of those things. We have a 1,000+ page book called, usually in most editions, 1,000+ page book called the Tanach, which gives a lot of insight into the way that the nation of Israel lived its life for over 1,000 years, close to 1,000 years actually. And we have archaeological evidence, we have external historical evidence. So things do get written down. Even if a culture is just keeping something orally, there will be evidence in the archaeological record, in the historical record, in the written record of their style of life. And we don't see any of that anywhere, not in the official scribal written record, in other words, the Tanakh, not in the archaeological record, not in external historical sources, nothing. There's no evidence for 1,000 years, for more than 1,000 years, really, of anything resembling rabbinical Judaism being kept by the children of Israel anywhere. And one of the proofs that I like to bring is that when they, over the years, uncover communities that have been cut off from rabbinical Judaism for thousands of years, then very often these communities will have no sense whatsoever of rabbinical Judaism. They won't put on tefillin. They won't separate meat and milk. They're just keeping the simple explanation of the Torah, the simple interpretation of the Torah. And then every so often you'll find they have one or two things, because it turns out that, well, they did have some contact with rabbinical Judaism over the years, but they just never really adopted rabbinical Judaism. But I think a good way to think about, there are two ways to think about this. So number one, or two ways to explain, what's the word? No, just to think about this. So one thing is, let's say you were suddenly abandoned. You had no contact with let's set it up correctly. Let's say you had no contact with Judaism whatsoever, nothing, nowhere in your entire life. I don't know, you grew up in a cave, and then, or you lived on a deserted island your entire life, okay? And of course, it's a thought experiment. And then all of a sudden you found a Torah scroll somewhere, and you understood the language magically, but all you had was that Torah scroll. All you had was the 5 books of Moses, and you read through it, and you realized, oh my gosh, I don't know, somehow you figured out somehow that this was left for you, that you're Israelite, you're Jewish, and now you have to keep this what's written in the scroll. Okay, is it doable? Of course it's doable. Of course it's doable. It's completely doable if you know the language, right? And okay, then we can get into a whole other story of how you know the language, etc. I don't want to get into the whole philosophy of it right now, because we'll go down a rabbit hole. So yes, there are some things like the meaning of the words, the language, the alphabet that are passed down orally from generation to generation, right? I don't completely discount this idea of a quote oral law, but I don't like to call it an oral law. I call it more a continuity of a society, or continuity of a culture, or you can call it a living tradition or something like that. But anyway, we're going down a rabbit hole. So going back to this thought experiment, if you knew the language and you knew what the words meant, could you keep that what is written in the Torah scroll? Of course you could. There goes the internet. There may be some things that are clear. There's the internet again. Let me see if I can switch over to another network and see if that's going to solve the problem. Hold on 1 second. I may disappear for a second. If I do, hopefully I'll be back. Okay, hopefully we're back. If the internet is not working well, let me know. Okay, please let me know immediately. Hopefully it will. But okay, I'm gonna switch to a different. Wait, let's try this again. The internet here is always problematic. All right, let's leave it for now and see what happens. If it gets shaky, then let me know. Shabbat shalom, Adrian. I already see it shaky. Hold on, I'm gonna switch back to the other thing. One second. Okay, this hopefully should be better. Hope you can see and hear me okay. Um, but yeah, you could keep the Torah. For sure you could. It's pretty straightforward. Do not murder, okay? You don't really need much of an explanation for that. You know, even the laws of the sacrifices are pretty clear if you know the language. And another thing is that a teacher of mine many years ago used to say that the Torah, how did he phrase it? The Torah could not mean anything but the way that an ancient Israelite shepherd would understand it when hearing it in a public reading. And that's so true. The way the Torah was transmitted in ancient times, there were no people didn't have their own scrolls. This was before the printing press. It was before the internet, right? The internet wasn't invented until 500 BCE. We all know that, right? In ancient Greece. With that, of course, but it was there was no printing press. People didn't have books, and they couldn't. And for the most part, they didn't have scrolls unless they were very, very wealthy. Because to make a scroll, you had to slaughter an entire flock of sheep. You had to process the parchment. You had to hire a scribe to copy word for word. It was a huge amount, like just like when they make these Torah scrolls today. You know, it can cost $50,000, $100,000 to make a Torah scroll, right? So people didn't have Torah scrolls. They the way that they heard the Torah was that they heard it in public readings in the gates of the city, or if they went to Jerusalem, they would hear it by the temple in Jerusalem after the temple was built. This is the way that the Torah was transmitted. So imagine yourself as a typical ancient Israelite, a farmer or a shepherd, and you're walking through the gate of your city and you hear one of these public readings of the Torah. That's the way that you would understand what it meant. That's the way that you would understand that what it meant. And for the most part, it was written for the people to understand in this way, that they should know what the laws of the Torah say. The Torah was not a covenant between Yahweh and a scribal class. It was a covenant between Yahweh and the people of Israel, and the messages were clear and they were direct. The same goes for the messages of the prophets. If you read the prophets, a couple of weeks ago I was in Jerusalem, and I read the story. I believe it's Jeremiah 17, if I'm remembering correctly, that he goes down to the Gebene Hinnom, the valley of the sons of Hinnom, and he takes with him an earthenware vessel, and he makes this long speech about how Yahweh is going to break Israel, and then he takes the earthenware vessel and he smashes it on the ground, breaks it into a million pieces in front of all the people that were there by the Watergate it mentions, which has been excavated, by the way. And actually, say the Watergate there. It doesn't matter. At any rate, so it may not. No, it doesn't there. At any rate, that's not the point. The point is that these were direct messages. These were messages for the people. You did not need some kind of scribal class to come and interpret what Jeremiah was saying. No, he's saying Yahweh is going to come. He's going to break these people to pieces, and then he takes this earthenware vessel and smashes it, and it breaks into a million pieces. This was a direct message to the people without intermediaries. Okay. The only exception I would say to this in the Torah, really, there may be two exceptions, okay, but the main exception might be the laws for the Levites and the Cohanim. There you have a priestly class that their specialty is to understand the laws of the Mishkan / Beit HaMikdash, basically the Mikdash, okay, and to understand the intricacies of the laws of sacrifices, of Tahara and Tumah, quote unquote, purity, impurity, ritual impurity, ritual purity, ritual impurity, and all of the details of their specialty which is to guard the sanctity of the Mikdash and to administer the avodah, administer the systematic worship, the prescribed worship in the Torah of Yahweh, the various sacrifices, the incense, etc. Okay, so that is technical knowledge, but even there, it's clear in the Torah. The Levites didn't need to go elsewhere to find out about it. They just needed to become experts in that part of the written Torah. But most of the Torah, and the other exception I will say, are that like any society, there will be those who know more and those who know less. So if you're going to be a judge or if you're going to be a leader in the society, then obviously your responsibility is to really know and understand and internalize the laws of the Torah, because you're going to have to judge people based on those laws, just like a judge today. Okay, I know the law. I know that I'm not allowed to drive through a red light. I know that I'm not allowed to, I don't know, that if my dog poops on the sidewalk, I'm supposed to pick it up. But I'm not a judge, so I don't need to know all of the details. I don't need to understand it and remember it and internalize it to the degree that someone who's judging a case, so if I'm brought before a judge and the judge says, you let your dog Fido, poop on the sidewalk, and has to run a case or has to administer a case and then come to a decision, then obviously this is his mitzvah. Okay, so he's going to have to spend his time thinking about these laws, not adding to the laws and not taking away from the laws as the rabbis have done, but understanding and knowing the laws and thinking about how to administer the laws. And as we saw in, was it Leviticus 17? Exodus 17, if I remember correctly, that such a judge would have to have certain qualities. They have to be God-fearing, wise, despising betzah. How do you say betzah in English? Bribery or favoritism. Okay, these are qualities, but these are the qualities of the type of person who's meant to be a judge over the people, who's meant to be a leader over the people. But that doesn't mean that judge has any more access to the laws of the Torah than the average person hearing the Torah walking through the gates of the city would have. That judge has access to the exact same words of the written Torah that the people would. He just happens to dedicate his life to remembering, understanding, thinking about these laws, and becoming a good person and a God-fearing, wise, and honest person to be able to be a judge, to be able to make decisions and administer or guard these laws when necessary for the people. Okay, but other than that, there's no secret knowledge, behind the scenes knowledge that's handed down just to judges or just to Levites or just to Cohanim. There's not a secret Torah somewhere that only the Levites and the Cohanim have access to and the rest of the people don't. Okay, the Torah, the written Torah, anybody has access, or anybody that would have access to the entire Torah would have access also to the parts that are written for the Cohanim and the Levim. It's just that they don't need to become experts in those parts of the Torah. They're just living their lives. They're going about and they're harvesting their grains, or they are flocking, herding their cattle, herding their sheep, and living their day-to-day lives. Okay, but there's nothing behind the scenes that's passed down, some kind of secret knowledge that's passed down by the Cohanim or the Levites from generation to generation that any person having access to the written Torah would not have access to. So that's the point. That is the point. So when the rabbis say oral law, when the rabbis call their bizarre interpretations of the Torah, which they came up with, or which developed in the mid-Second Temple period, and oral law, they are trying to sell you a can of beans and telling you that it's jewelry inside it, because it's a marketing ploy. It's a marketing ploy to say that, well, the reason that you have to keep these laws, or the reason that you don't see this anywhere written in the Torah, or that there's no evidence of it anywhere in the archaeological historical record. There was no archaeology back then, but there's no evidence of it anywhere in the written Torah. or anywhere else for that matter, is because it was passed down orally. It wouldn't have left a written record. That's the snake oil that the rabbis are trying to sell the people of Israel and have been trying to sell the people of Israel for over 2,000 years. That their innovations, if you want to be nice, their distortions of the Torah, you can't find them anywhere in the written Torah because they were passed down orally. But as we said, even things that are passed down orally are going to leave their mark in one way or another. Either your ancestors are going to remember them, or you're going to see something in the historical record, in the archaeological record, in the buildings. I guess the rabbis took advantage of the fact that there was really no historical or archaeological record, or not much of an historical record, and not any archaeological record, although I guess there were ruins of buildings here and there. But why is it trying to do this? 1 second, please. 1 second. Right? But that is what they're trying to sell. They're trying to explain away, or they're trying to explain the fact that their brand of Judaism doesn't seem to appear anywhere in the written Torah. And so they have to make up a lie to sell it to the people, to say it was passed down orally. And so therefore they call their bizarre innovations the oral law. It would be like if I were to, I don't know, let's say the entire world stopped playing, I don't know, basketball or something like that, and I were to come along and I wanted to revive the sport of basketball, and I took the rule book for the sport of basketball and I gave it out to all the people, but I wanted to change it. I don't know. I wanted to make it a little bit different, so that, let's say, every time someone scores 5 points, then I get $1,000 or something like that. Something that would, benefit me. Okay. Well, we have this written record of the laws of basketball, and we don't see anywhere in the written law of the laws of basketball that every time somebody scores 5 points, or a team scores 5 points, then Melech ben Yaakov gets $1,000. Oh, but that's not good. I'd like my $1,000. So what am I going to do? I'm going to say, yeah, it's not written down because that is part of the laws of basketball. That's part of the rules of basketball. It's just that it was passed down orally from generation to generation. That's why it's not written down. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to play this new form of basketball. And Melech ben Yaakov is going to get his $1,000 every time 5 points are scored by a team. And don't worry about it. You're not going to find it in the written law, because it's not in the written law, because it was just passed down orally. But I promise you, it goes all the way back to the very beginnings of basketball, which was in, I don't know, Springfield, Massachusetts in 18 something. I'm not a basketball expert, right? You get the idea. And so what would the rabbis respond to that? Well, they would say, well, no, you just ask your father. Your father kept our form of Judaism, and your grandfather and your great-grandfather. And that might have been true. Maybe your father did, and your grandfather did, and your great-grandfather did, but they had also been influenced by the rabbinical movement. But if you go back far enough, you will come to an ancestor that did not keep that form of rabbinical Judaism, just as if you can go back far enough and ask your father, your grandfather, let's say, reinstate my new form of basketball in the year 2500, and basketball stopped in the year 2024, then if you were able to go back far enough to 2024, then your ancestors would tell you, no, we did not give Melech ben Yaakov $1,000 every time the team scored 5 points. Okay. And then the rabbis are going to come back and they're going to say, well, it's a chain of tradition. It's passed down from generation to generation. They wouldn't have distorted it. The first people, or the first generation that had to face this change or had to undergo this change, would have realized this is something different, and would not have accepted these innovations, would not have accepted this quote unquote oral law. And the answer to that is that's also a bunch of baloney, because movements grow out of nothing. Any movement, any religion we can see started with 0 people or 1 person and then grew. Take Islam, started with 1 person, Muhammad. Take Christianity, it started with 1 person, Jesus, and it now has 1 billion people. Islam has approximately 1 billion people. These are religions, these are movements that all started with 1 person. MAGA started with 1 person, Donald Trump. So movements could grow very big, starting from nowhere, to the point that if you ask someone, if someone doesn't know history, and you ask them in, let's say, MAGA keeps winning for the next 100 years, then the person in the year 2124 can say, oh, manga's been around for hundreds of years. And if you didn't have access to history, if you didn't have access to archaeology, if you didn't have access to all of these tools, then you'd have no way of disproving that. And that's exactly what the rabbis rely on. Rabbinical Judaism grew out of a small movement. Rabbinical Judaism grew out of a small movement. It seems to have begun in Babylon, heavily influenced by Babylonian culture, heavily influenced by the religion of Babylon/Persia, which was even back then Zoroastrianism. And it grew and it grew and it grew like a cancer until it just spread out and became normative Judaism, replacing the original form of Torah that had been kept for over 1,000 years. And the rest is, pardon the pun, history. Okay. All right. So that's that. I want to, if you give me 1 second, I'm going to have to put some music on. I just need to take care of something regarding the internet because I want to switch over to a different network. And it's just going to take a minute. So let me put on just a bit of music and I will be right back.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שמיים וארץ, אני אתן לבות.
Okay, we are back. We are back. Let me just do a quick sound check. Can you guys hear me and see me okay? Is everything smooth? Is everything smooth? Let's get rid of these banners. I think that should do it. Can you guys hear me okay? Somebody let me know. Somebody put a Y or a yes into the comments to let me know that you can hear me okay. Anybody? Somebody, please let me know. All right, I'll assume you can. If you can't, then you'll let me know. Okay, let me open up the window here a little bit to get a little bit of a better signal. Okay, so we're back. All right, so I was gonna go through the book of Job a little bit, but it's already 5:30 here. So, and I do want to get into Leviticus, so maybe we'll save the book of Job for next week. And maybe we'll just start diving right into Leviticus chapter 21. So let's go check it out. Just give me a second, set up the screen here. It's page 1002. One second. Okay, so we're in Leviticus chapter 21. I'm going to share the screen. Get rid of this. And you should be able to see the screen now. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 21. And now we're getting back into, so for a couple of chapters here, we dealt with kind of the moral law, right? We dealt with a lot of laws dealing with, they usually call it sexual immorality, but I don't like to translate it, or I don't like to explain it that way. It's really sexual depravity. As I always like to say, the Torah is quite open about sexual issues. It's quite liberal even about sexual issues. But where it does draw the red line is depravity, right? You know, having sex with your sister, your mother, your granddaughter, your pet, your next door neighbor's wife, and so on. Any normal person would realize that this is depraved. There's something seriously wrong with this. But the prudishness that is usually associated with religions, with Christianity especially, but then it seeped its way into Judaism over the years, is really not part of the Torah. I mean, Solomon had 300 wives and 700 concubines. David had a number of wives and lots of concubines, or a bunch of concubines. These people were, going at it like rabbits, basically. And there's no restriction on the way they had to do it. There was no such concept as, let's say, just the missionary position, or not doing this or not doing the other. I don't need to get into all the gory details, but you get the idea. The Torah is not in the least bit prudish. It really allows a fair amount of sexual freedom, but there's a red line. It draws the red line at anything that is just sick. I mean, if you look on the internet and you look at some of the stuff that you'll see on the porn sites, then you'll see some really sick stuff out there. So anything that you would say, wow, that's really sick, that's probably what the Torah is talking about. Okay, so let's get into Leviticus chapter 21. So we're not dealing with the laws of sexual depravity or the laws of morality that we dealt with in chapters 18 through 20. If we go back to 17, then in 17, just for a recap, here we're dealing also with, I guess you could say, more technical things, or the idea of not eating the blood. And in 16, we dealt with the details of Yom Kippurim. And before that, basically, we're dealing with the laws of ritual impurity. Before that, the sacrificial system. So chapters 18, 19, and 20 were, in a sense, a departure. We went over to more moral laws. And now, at least for this chapter, in chapter 21, we're going back to a bit more technical stuff, which is really what is typical of the book of Leviticus. As we said, the book of Leviticus is really a book for the priests, for the most part. It's a book, those who believe in the documentary hypothesis, which I've mentioned a bunch of times and which I bring up from time to time because people need to know it's out there. Hold on a second. There's some activity going. Hold on one second. I think one of my cats is fighting with another. Hey, what's going on? What is John? What's going on? Big boy, you need to go. Big boy, you need to get out of here. No, I want you out of here. Oh, it's Marie. Woo woo. All right. All right. Sorry about that. They'll have to work it out themselves and their cat. But that really sounded really bad there for a second. I don't know, some stray cats that come in here and then my cats fight with the stray. It doesn't matter. Okay. So, right. So the book of, I was talking about the documentary hypothesis. So the documentary hypothesis is the idea that the Torah was written by different sources. There are four main sources that they speak about. The EP, the E, the J, the P, and the D. Elohists, the Jehovists, or the Yahwists, the priestly source, and the Deuteronomical source, which is basically the book of Deuteronomy. But it's the idea that the Torah was written by a bunch of different authors, and then what's the word I'm looking for? And then this one specific word that I'm looking for, which I can't think of the word, but anyway, coalesced into this book that we know as the Torah. So the documentary hypothesis would say that most of the book of Leviticus was the P source, the priestly source. It was written by priests, and then their writings were incorporated much later on into the Torah, the book of the Torah. But that's, of course, I don't believe that. And I think, there's no real evidence for that. And so what we would say as believing Jews, as believing Israelites, is not that it was written by the priests, but it was written for the priests. So the documentary hypothesis, the secular scholars would say that the book of Leviticus focuses so much on the priests because it was written by the priests. But we, as believing Israelites, as those who believe that the Torah is divine, would say that it wasn't written by the priests, that the book of Leviticus was written mostly for the priests, right? As we see here, Yahweh said to Moses, speak to the priests. So Yahweh is speaking to Moses, and then Moses and telling him to tell the priests, and then passing on laws to the priests, to the Cohanim. So, we're in Leviticus chapter 21. And I think we got down to right. Trying to remember where we got. 1 second here. A priest defiles. I think we just got through the first chapter. So let's just read the first paragraph. Let's just read the first paragraph in English, and then we'll continue on in Hebrew. So just to get the context. So Yahweh said to Moses, speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, a priest must not make himself ceremonially unclean. Some water for a second. For any of his people who die, except for a close relative, such as his mother or father, his son or daughter, his brother, or an unmarried sister who is dependent on him, since she has no husband, for he may make himself unclean. So what does this mean? We learned earlier in Leviticus that when a person dies and another person comes in contact with a dead body, or even comes in the same tent or the same structure, the same room as the dead body, then that person acquires a state of uncleanliness, of ritual uncleanliness. He gets the cooties. He becomes tameh. And the priests, the Cohanim, have to be super careful about not becoming tameh, because they are the ones who are in contact with the mikdash, with the tabernacle, with the temple, right, with the holy areas. So the priests have a special obligation to be super careful about not becoming unclean, because if they become unclean and then they have contact with the mikdash, with the sanctuary, I'll just say that the holy temple, but that also includes, of course, the tabernacle/temple area within the courtyard there, then they've done a big no-no, as we've said many times, that you can be clean or unclean if you're anywhere but the Beit HaMikdash, you can be clean or unclean. But if you're in the Beit HaMikdash, you must be clean. You cannot be unclean. And clean doesn't mean stepped in dog poop. Clean doesn't even mean didn't take a shower for 3 days, which probably the Israelites in ancient times didn't. Clean doesn't mean any of that stuff. Clean means these things that make a person ritually unclean, that give them, quote unquote, the cooties. And you could think of it as, I always like to think of it, I've mentioned before that this is beyond being dirty, it's just unclean. So think of it, you had like 3 garbage cans. One garbage can was just for regular garbage. The second garbage can was for just disgusting things. And the third garbage can was just like vile things, like ugh, kind of things. The tameh stuff would be in the ugh kind of things. So let's do a little thought experiment. I've spoken about this before, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But if you had, I don't know, if you're just throwing out a piece of paper that came in the mail today, an advertisement for 50% off at, I don't know, Bed Bath & Beyond or something like that, that just goes in the regular garbage can. How about if you had, I don't know, you you were walking in your socks and you stepped in dog crap, okay? That's going to go, if you don't want to wash the socks, you just want to throw them out, that's going to go in garbage can number 2. This garbage can for disgusting things, okay? I mean, for dirty things, really, we'll call it disgusting things. Or let's say, I don't know, you were walking down the street and, I don't know, you fell in a pile of, I don't know, mud or something like that. Or you fell in, you landed on, I don't know. We'll just go with the dog crap, okay? That's in garbage can too. How about if you found in your backyard a discarded condom that a couple of people were using your backyard to have some fun the last night? Is that going to go in garbage number 1 with the with the paper from the 50% discount from Bed Bath & Beyond? No. Is it going to go in garbage can number 2, where you have the sock with the dog crap in it? No, you're going to want to put that in a different special garbage. Okay, you don't want that. That's beyond dirty and disgusting. That's just vile. That is just what is the word? That's just that is just nasty, as the kids like to say. Okay, so that's going in garbage can 3. How about if you found a dead, discarded animal? Okay, you're going to put that in garbage number 2 with the dog crap, or you're going to put that in garbage number 3. You're going to put that in garbage number 3. How about a tampon that has a used tampon? Is that going in garbage number 2, or that's going in garbage number 3? That's going in garbage number 3. You get the idea. There are certain things that are just beyond dirty and disgusting, and that is really repulsive, nasty, icky cooties. It's beyond dog shit disgusting. It's, please get this out of my face. This is just, yeah, right? It's that reaction. And that's what the Torah's concept of dirty tissues that smell like chlorine. I don't know what you're into, you ordained man. I don't know. Stay away from me, dude. Anyway, so anywho, just joking. But that's the idea of ritual uncleanliness in the Torah. And we see again, it goes back to the theme of the Torah is not crazy. With even we said before, the Torah is not prude when it comes to sexual stuff. It's not prudish, okay? But it has a red line, and that red line is anything that is depraved, sexual depravity. And it's the same thing with dirtiness. Okay, we all step in dog shit. I almost stepped in dog shit yesterday when I was going to the synagogue. I'd never seen it before. Should I really be saying this in a Torah study? Ask Stuart. I'll say in a Torah study. Oh, I got to plug it in a second. There was a dog took a crap and it actually stood up. I don't know how the dog did it, but it wasn't lying on its side. It like stood up like a tower, and it just froze in place. And I was like, "What is that?" I thought it was like a little anthill or something like that, or I don't know what it was. And it was a piece of dog crap that had dried on the side of it. Anyway, you get the idea, okay? The Torah is, when it comes to cleanliness and uncleanliness, we all step in dog crap, and that does not make a person prohibited from going to the Beit HaMikdash. If you track a little sheep crap into the courtyard of the Beit HaMikdash, no biggie. But there is a limit. There's a red line which cannot be crossed, just like in sexual morality. Depravity is the red line. Beyond that red line is just sexual depravity. So there are certain things that are just beyond disgusting, which cross the red line. They're almost like, shall we say, dirty, depravedly dirty, like the examples that I gave: discarded condoms, rotting dead bodies, and used tampons and stuff like that. You get the idea, but it really draws out the point that the Torah is not a crazy document. It's actually a very logical, normal, sane, common sense document. But just like our parents, our teachers, us, have red lines, have limits, so the Torah and God has its limits. Okay, so let me just plug in for 1 second. I'm not going to stop the show. Just give me a second to grab the cord. I'm going to plug in, and we will continue in Leviticus 21. See here. Okay, we should be plugged in now. And dead human bodies is one of those things that are in that third category. They are just so vile, so disgusting. If you found a dead body, and I like to give this thought experiment as well. Let's say you had two houses that you could buy. They were both looked exactly the same. Let's say they looked exactly the same. And one, you found out that in one, it was just a nice normal house, and the other house cost the same, looked exactly the same price, everything. In the other one, a person had been murdered, and the body was left to rot there for a month before it was discovered. Which house are you going to buy? There's just something disgusting about being in a place that you even knew that in the past a murdered dead body, or just a dead body, had sat and rotted for a month. That's the idea that the Torah is trying to get across with this idea of uncleanliness. Well, we're not necessarily talking about murder here, but we're just talking about a dead body in general. We know, as we learned earlier in Leviticus, that contact with a dead body, or even being in the same room with a dead body, makes a person acquire this cooties. Okay, I had a friend who, her job, she was a nurse, and she one time got a job as she had to guard the morgue in a hospital. Her job was basically to guard the dead bodies in a hospital, and she actually told me a totally true story. I'm not a nurse, so I cannot confirm it, but she's a very reliable person. You know, after people die, they have rigor mortis, I guess. Their muscles contracted. She's, I kid you not, it's a totally true story. I guess it would have been more appropriate to tell it last week when it was closer to Halloween. She said she was sitting guarding the morgue one night, and all of a sudden, a dead body, from this rigor mortis, from the contraction of the muscles, it was lying on its back. It sat upright. Its face turned towards her, and it went, ah, just like that. Absolutely 100% true story. I could put you in contact with the person. In fact, Mariana McNana, you know this person. She was your life coach for a little while. Totally true story. So just imagine if, how you would feel the next morning if your job was to sit and guard dead bodies all night long. You would definitely want to be taking a shower. Anything that says, "Ooh, I don't want to take one shower." Okay, if you fall in dog crap, you're going to want to take a shower. But anything where you say, "I don't want to just take one shower. I just feel like no matter how many, I have to take 10 showers to get this feeling of dirtiness off of me." That is the idea of teumah in the Torah. That's the idea of ritual uncleanliness. Okay, so at any rate, we see that a Kohen who has to be super careful about this issue of ritual uncleanliness, because his job, his career is to be in constant contact with these holy areas, and ritual uncleanliness, cooties plus holy areas is a big no-no. That's when Yahweh gets really pissed off. That's why we have Leviticus chapter 16, where we have an entire day dedicated to atoning for any inadvertent situations like this, any situations where we may have sullied up the mikdash, the sanctuary, by mistake, maybe even on purpose. So you get the idea. Okay, so Kohen is not allowed to come in contact with a dead body to get himself ritually unclean for anyone except his immediate family. Okay, he must not make himself unclean for people related to him by marriage, and so defile himself. We saw that this in Hebrew was what Robert Alter likes to call a crux. It was not so clear what it means in Hebrew. And there were a couple of different interpretations, or a couple of different translations. And a hint that I have been giving you guys for, I think, years now, is if you want to know whether a Torah verse makes sense or not, or if you suspect that a Torah verse may not make sense, check 5 or 6 or 10 different translations. And if you see a bunch of different translations for the same verse, bunch of different, I don't mean slightly different words, but different meanings, then you know that nobody really knows what that verse means in Hebrew. And this is one of those verses, but we're going to skip ahead now. And we're going to go to the Hebrew. So we got down to here, I believe. Yeah, we did. So let's go over to the Hebrew now. Any questions, any comments so far? What the heck is this? Okay, 1 second. Privacy error. There we go. Okay. It's okay. Alrighty. So let's see, where were we? אחותו בתולה, קרובה אליו אשר לא הייתה לאיש לה יטמע, לא יטמע בעל בעמיו, להיכלו, and here we were. So we see the context here. Okay, so let me translate. So we're in verse 5. We're in Leviticus chapter 21, verse 5. And we have lo יקרהו קורחה בראשם ופאת זקנם לא יגלחו ובבשרם לא יסרטו סרטה. I'm sorry, saratet. So they shall not make a bald spot on their head. They should not shave off the corners or the edges of their beards. And they should not make gashes in their flesh. These are all mourning rituals that were common among the pagans in ancient times and even to this day, as a matter of fact. But in ancient times, these were common mourning rituals, and these are considered inappropriate for Israelites to partake in, because they all involve desecration or mangling of the body. True, they're not permanent. None of these things are permanent. Cutting off part of your hair, cutting off part of your beard, or gashing your skin, but they're not appropriate to start self-defiling or to start self-harming in response to mourning for the dead is not considered appropriate. And I think the reason I've thought about this for many years, and I think the reason it's not considered appropriate, it's for a number of reasons, but I think one of the main reasons is that it doesn't take into account, or it doesn't express a deep understanding that when one believes in Yahweh, the God of Israel, then death is a natural part of life, and death is not the end of the world. That there is a resurrection at the end of days, Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, and that death is not final. To start self-mutilating is, in a certain sense, it's an admittance, or it's showing that when the pagans do this, they don't really believe in a kind, merciful God. They believe in a cruel God. The gods must be angry. And so the way they need to appease their anger, the anger of these lowercase g gods, these false gods, is to self-mutilate, because this angry God can only be appeased, can only be pacified when there is some kind of suffering for human beings, because he hates and despises human beings, and he considers them his slaves, just as the Greek gods considered human beings to basically be these pesky slaves. It's the same reason that you see all kinds of, or various kinds of, idol worship. We spoke about when I was in, again, the Valley of the Sons of Hinnom in Jerusalem a couple of weeks ago. We spoke about in the Valley of the Sons of Hinnom that there was the Tophet there. Nobody knows exactly what the word Tophet means, but it's often translated as pyre. But it does say explicitly in two places in Jeremiah and one place in, I believe, 2 Kings, that the Israelites were sacrificing children in the valley, in the sons of the Valley of Hinnom. So why would anyone sacrifice their own child? Because if you believe that God is an uncaring, angry God who's at any second can strike out, is out to get you, and if you do the slightest thing wrong, is going to strike out against you, then how do you appease this angry God? Well, this angry God despises you. He despises humanity. And so if you sacrifice human beings, babies, especially virgins, babies, in this case, babies, right? It's the same idea of sacrifice of virgins. If you sacrifice babies, then you're gonna appease the anger of this cruel and uncaring God who despises human beings and just really wants nothing to do with them, or wants them out of his way. So self-mutilation, and in a certain sense, sacrificing one's baby is kind of, in a certain sense, a form of self-mutilation, because a baby is, at that age, a child is really an extension of his parents. So you're giving away part of yourself. You're destroying part of yourself to pacify, to appease the angry gods. And obviously, this is very, very far from the Torah's attitude, from the Israelite attitude towards our God, Yahweh. Yahweh is not an angry God who hates and who despises human beings. He's our Father. He's kind and he's merciful, and he loves all of us, and he has his reasons for doing what he does. And if we had time to study the book of Job, that is really what the book of Job speaks about, that Yahweh has his reasons for doing what he does, even if we don't understand it. And Job, the righteousness of Job, beyond the fact that he was a righteous person to begin with, was that he never questioned. Well, he questioned, but he never blamed, or never what's the words I'm looking for? He never hated God or thought that he was I don't know, I'm losing my train of thought. but basically Job didn't have this attitude towards Yahweh, towards the God Yahweh. He didn't understand why Yahweh was doing what he was doing. He proclaimed his innocence to the very end, and then Yahweh came and justified his innocence in the end of the book of Job. He even at a certain point says that he wishes he could drag God into court and be judged and have a trial between himself and God and Yahweh because he believes he's innocent. But what he never does is he never goes to the point where he curses God, where he gives up on God, where he disparages God to the point where he rejects, I won't say God, where he rejects Yahweh. Because he understands that Yahweh is not this type of God that's being expressed here in Leviticus chapter 21:5. He's not the type of God who wants child sacrifices. He's not the type of God who wants us to do self-harm, to appease the angry gods. He's a kind and merciful God, but when he brings tragedies upon us, when he brings death upon us, upon our close family members, or any other types of tragedies, such as the tragedies that fell upon Job, then he has a reason for it. And Job never questioned God's basic, or Yahweh's basic right. I don't know if that's the right word. Yahweh's basic decision to do what he did to Job. He just said, "This is what you're doing is unfair. I don't deserve this." No, I wouldn't even use those words. What you're doing is not commensurate with my righteousness, and I maintain my righteousness. And he did maintain his righteousness. Then his friends come along. So there's three friends, and then a fourth person that comes along. So his friends, Eliphaz the Temani, Bildad the Shuhi, and Sophar Naamanti. Those are three friends who come along, and what do they essentially try to do? They try to say, if you're proclaiming your innocence, and you're saying that Yahweh is going to punish an innocent person, then you're disparaging Yahweh. You're telling me that Yahweh is going to come along and punish an innocent person? No, couldn't be the case. The case is that you, Job, are guilty. And either you're not admitting it, you don't want to admit it, maybe you don't even realize it, you need to do some more prayer, you need to do some more introspection. There must be something you're not realizing that you did wrong, because you're not going to come along and insult Yahweh by saying that he is going to punish an innocent person. And the three friends thought they were defending Yahweh. And Eov said, no, this is not the case. I'm innocent, and Yahweh has punished an innocent person. I don't say he doesn't have the right to do so. I'm just saying that he has punished an innocent person here. And his friend said, you're crazy, Eov. You're crazy, Job. You're saying that Yahweh is going to punish an innocent person? How can the judge of all the world do something that is unjust? And Job says, I don't know. I can't explain it, but I know that I'm innocent, and I know that Yahweh is righteous, and he has his reasons for doing what he did, but he has punished an innocent person. And in the end, when we have the last chapters of the book of Job, when Yahweh speaks to Job and his friends out of the whirlwind, that's essentially what Yahweh says. He says Job has spoken wisely, and his friends have spoken unwisely, to the point where Yahweh says to Job that Job has to sacrifice for his friends, lest Yahweh get very angry at them. But Yahweh says everything Job has said is correct. I have punished an innocent person. Job was innocent, and I've punished an innocent person. Why have I done that? And then in the story, in the book of Job, Yahweh goes into this long poem, basically, about where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Do you know how I did this? Do you know how I did that? Do you have the wisdom? Were you around when I was? When you were born? Were you born before me? Have you lived longer than me? This long poem about how Yahweh has wisdom, and the implication is what Yahweh is saying in this poem is that he has his reasons for doing things, and he doesn't have to explain his reasons to anybody. And his friends who came along and tried to explain away Yahweh's actions thought they were doing Yahweh a favor by defending him, by saying that he was punishing not an innocent man, but a guilty man, that Job was actually guilty. But Yahweh says, you weren't doing me any favors, because you are trying to, by doing that, you're trying to box me in and tell me what I can and cannot do, what I should and should not do. You think you're doing me a favor? You think you're defending me by saying that the reason I punished Job is because he was not an innocent man, that he was guilty and deserved it? You're then boxing me in. You're telling me what I should and should not do. I punished an innocent man. Why? I have my reasons, and I don't have to explain my reasons to anybody. And it's not that I'm mean or I'm cruel. It's just that I've been around for a long time, and sometimes I do things and I have my reasons for doing them. It's always out of mercy. It's always out of kindness, but I have my reasons, and I don't need to explain it to you. And I don't need you, your stupid friends, trying to defend me and tell me what I should or should not do, or thinking they're going to defend me by saying that I punished Job only because he was guilty. Any rate, it's long and complicated. Correct. The friends were wrong and almost died. And it is, I like to say, the second greatest work of philosophy in the history of humanity. The first being, in my opinion, Ecclesiastes by King Solomon. But Job is just an absolutely brilliant work of philosophy. And most people think that the basic theme that the book of Job is dealing with is why bad things happen to good people. And I don't think that's the case at all. That is not what the book of Job is dealing with. The book of Job is dealing with faith in Yahweh, that Yahweh is a good and kind and merciful God, no matter what happens to us. It's not explaining why good things happen to bad people at all. In fact, it never explains it, because Yahweh, when he comes out of the whirlwind at the end of the book of Job, never explains why he did what he did to Job. His answer is, I don't have to explain. I've been around for a heck of a long time. Job was an innocent person. I did what I did because I have my reasons, and I don't have to explain it to you guys. I don't have to explain it to anybody. Not in a bad way, but in a way that is kind and merciful. I think that maybe came along as like, hey, I don't got to explain myself to no one. No, that's not the impression I meant to give. The impression is that Yahweh has so much wisdom, and he's been around for so long, quote unquote. He's been around outside of space and time forever, if we want to put it that way, that his wisdom is not our wisdom, and he doesn't have any obligation to explain his decisions to us human beings. And the real theme, or the real point, the real punchline of the book of Job is that Job realized that Job never crossed the line where he cursed out God for doing what he did. He was very puzzled, very upset, maybe even a bit angry at Yahweh for making the decisions he did. But he never said to Yahweh, you cannot do, or you have no right. Again, English is not really expressing it well, but you have done something to the point where, hey, I cut myself off from you. Yahweh, Job held his faith to Yahweh, despite the fact that he knew that Yahweh was punishing him, even though he was a completely innocent man. And that's the point of the book of Job. The point of the book of Job, as I always like to say, is the same lesson that we learn from the Akedah, that we learn from when Abraham almost sacrifices his son Isaac. Abraham has no idea, why is Yahweh telling me to go sacrifice my only son? I waited 99 years to have this son. Ishmael is gone, and Ishmael was never following my footsteps anyway, and Ishmael was born from a concubine, not from my beloved wife Sarah. I don't have any other children with my beloved wife Sarah. I waited 100 years to have this child, and now you're telling me I have to kill him? Child sacrifice? Forget that. That's the point they always focus on, but that's not even the point. I have to kill my only real son, my only child who's going to be following in my footsteps that I waited 100 years for. And yet Avram got up early in the morning, and he went and did everything without hesitation that Yahweh asked him to do. Not because he or let me put it a different way. Why did he do it? Because his love for Yahweh was so great at that point, and his trust in Yahweh was so great at that point, that he was essentially able to say the same thing that Yov said. Yov and Abraham are, in a sense, cut from the same cloth, or in these two stories are cut from the same cloth. They both are saying, I don't understand why this is happening, but I have so much love and faith and trust in Yahweh that if this is what his decision is, then I accept it. I think it's wrong. In the case of Job explicitly, maybe in the case of Abraham, I would say certainly, even though we weren't there and the Torah doesn't really speak about what was going through Abraham's mind. But I would imagine in the case of Abraham, he's thinking the same thing. I don't understand why Yahweh is asking me to do this. This doesn't make any sense at all to me. But my faith and my belief in Yahweh is so great, and my love for Yahweh is so great, and my trust in Yahweh is so great that I'm going to do it anyway. It's kind of like, well, I'll get to what it's kind of like in a second, but we see that these are the same thought processes that are going on, both in the case of Job, never cursing Yahweh, even though he knows that that Yahweh is punishing him as an innocent man, and Abraham, never for a second hesitating to do what Yahweh is asking him to do. And this is not a test of fear or a test of blind faith. It's the opposite of blind faith. These are tests of love. Does Abraham really love me so much and trust me so much that he'll do even this for me? And of course, Yahweh never made him follow through with killing his son, but he was ready to. The angel had to stop, had to come out and tell Avram not to do it. Right when he had the knife over his, he's holding the machelet, the knife over his son, about to kill him, about to slaughter him. And Job, the same thing. Even though all of these horrible things happened to him, he lost all his children and all his wealth, and his body was filled with boils, and he sit there and with a potsherd and scrape the boils off himself. It says, and his friends looked at him, and they were in horror when they saw him. He never once, he had enough of a love and faith and trust in Yahweh that he never crossed the line and cursed Yahweh, even though that's what his wife in Job chapter 2 told him to do. It says, just curse Yahweh and die. Just get it over with already. Say what you got to say and just die. Let him kill you off. And Job said, you're a stupid woman. You're one of the stupid women. That was his response. Or are you like one of the stupid women to tell me to do such a thing? Job never did it. He questioned Yahweh. He wanted to drag Yahweh into court, figuratively speaking, and maybe literally speaking, but he never cursed Yahweh. He held his faith and his love to Yahweh. Okay. And then the other verse that I wanted to relate it to is Exodus chapter 3, where Yahweh says, he says his name. Let's just even find that for a second. Oh God. Don't worry, I don't have a cold. I need to drink some water. I'm sorry, not 3. Oops, I went the wrong direction. Yeah, 3. Where is it? Here, 3:14. And 3:15, but 3:14, when Yahweh reveals his name to Moses. So verse 13, let's just look at this for a second. Exodus chapter 3, verse 13. Vayomer Moshe el Elohim. So Moses said to God, Ine anochi ba el bnei Israel. Behold, I will go to the children of Israel. This is when Moses is being sent back to Egypt, just after as he's seen the burning bush, just after he's seen the burning bush. And he's now being told he has to go back to Egypt and free the people of Israel, the children of Israel. Amati lahem. So Moses says, I'm going to go to the children of Israel and I'm going to say to them, Elohei avotechem eshelachani alechem, sent me to you. V'amru li ma shemo. And then they'll say to me, what's his name? Because every God has a name. false gods have names. Jesus and Vishnu and and Chemosh and Baal Zevuv and all of these false gods have names, and the various followers of these false gods call out their names all the time. And how ironic that we're told by the rabbis that we can't call out the name of our true God, Yahweh. Any rate, so the first thing that people are going to say is, what is his name? What's the name of the God of our fathers appeared to you? What is his name? Because it was just known that every god had a name. So we need to know what is his name. Ma'omale elem, what should I say to them? In verse 14, Vayomer Elohim el Moshe, and God said to Moses, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. Now this is not his name. This is the phrase that explains why his name is Yahweh. But he says to Moses, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. I am who I am. Sometimes they translate it as I shall be who I shall be. But it's really I am who I am. And let me just go on and I'll get back to this phrase, I am who I am. Vayomer Koma Ko Tomar Livnei Yisrael. And he said, God said to Moses, so you shall say to the children of Israel, Ehyeh shelachani elechem. Ehyeh, I am, sent me to you. This is not Yahweh's real name. These are not names of Yahweh. These are just explanations for the name that is now going to be revealed in this verse. We see this a lot when, for instance, the names of when the sons of Jacob are named, or even when, we'll go with the sons of Jacob. The reason that each name is chosen is it's a reason is given, and then the name is given. So this is the reason why, verse 15, Vayomer od Elohim and Moshe, and then Yahweh said further to Moses, Kot tomar el ben Israel. This is what you shall actually say to the children of Israel. This is what you shall really say to the children of Israel. Yahweh Elohei avotechem, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, shelachani elechem. Yahweh, the God of your fathers, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, sent me to you. This is my name for eternity, from here on after, really. And this is the way you shall remember me. This is the way you shall call me from generation to generation. So his real name is Yahweh. That's in here in verse 15. Yahweh. It's the first time the name is actually revealed. It's revealed to Moses at the burning bush. But the explanation for the name, the background material, the context for the name, it's funny because for one of my clients, when I'm not doing Torah, which I would like to be doing all the time, actually it's good not to be doing it all the time, but I actually do have a day job, and that's computer programming. And one of the things I had to do for one of my clients this week was integrate to integrate ChatGPT into his website. So you ask a question and it gives an answer, and you ask another question, it gives an answer. And when you send the answer over to ChatGPT, or when you send the question over to ChatGPT, you don't just send the question, you can also optionally send something called a context. So the context is the background information on which the question is going to be answered. So let's say, I don't know, let's say I wanted to send a question over to ChatGPT. What's the temperature going to be today? The background information may be the person asking this question does not like hot and humid weather, and lives in, I don't know, in New York City. Maybe it's a bad example because it's not hot in New York City right now. So then ChatGPT doesn't just give an answer out of nowhere. ChatGPT gives an answer with a context. So if the answer was out of nowhere and I asked the question to ChatGPT, what's the weather today? Then I might get back from ChatGPT an answer just a dry answer, such as like, oh, the temperature is going to be, pretend it's July, the temperature is going to be 91 degrees and humid today. That's it. But if I give the context that, oh, the person asking this question is doesn't like hot weather and hates humidity and lives in New York City, then the answer might be more along the lines of, hey, you better stay inside today and sit in your air-conditioned room. It's going to be really hot and humid. In fact, they're saying it's going to get up to 92 degrees and it's going to be close to 100% humidity, right? You get the idea? So there's an answer, and then there's a context, or there's a question, and then there's a context to the question. And that's what we see with the naming, with many of the names in the Torah. There's an answer, and that answer is in verse 15. The answer is Yahweh. Oops, we're in Exodus 21. The answer is in verse 15. My name is Yahweh, but then there's a context to it. Why is my name Yahweh? Okay, because Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I am who I am, right? And without getting into all the technical grammatical similarities between Yahweh and Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, you can see that the Ehyeh sounds like Yahweh, right? So Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I am who I am. Why is this unplugged? There we go. So, one second here. I am who I am. And the point is, how does this relate back to the book of Job? And how does this relate back to the sacrifice of Abraham to Isaac? Because this I am who I am is expressing exactly the same idea that is being expressed in both of those other stories that we spoke about. When Abraham is told to go sacrifice Isaac, and he, again, we're reading into it doesn't say explicitly in the Torah, but I'm assuming or making, maybe speculating a bit, but I would say it's a pretty fair assumption that Abraham has no idea what's going on and doesn't understand why Yahweh is asking him to do this. Doesn't understand, maybe he understands that it's a test of love and it's a test of faith, but man, that's really a test of love and a test of faith. Do you really love me and trust me enough to sacrifice your own son that you waited 100 years for, your only real son, to sacrifice him, to kill him off? And there's so much else going on there, but that's the main idea. Do you really love and trust me enough to even do that? So in order for Abraham to be able to answer that question in the affirmative, then he has to understand that Yahweh is based on the idea of Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I am who I am. Abraham has to understand that Yahweh is who he is. He has his reasons for asking questions, and he doesn't have to explain himself to anybody. And if we really love him and we really trust him, we may not understand why he does what he does, but through our love and our trust of Yahweh, as we develop a personal relationship with him, and it can only be through a personal relationship with him, we know that even if he does things that we think are just totally unfair or wrong or even bizarre, nuts, right? That Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, he is who he is, I am who I am. And if we have total faith in him and total trust in him and total love for him, then we realize he has his reasons for doing what he's doing, for asking us to do what he's asking us to do, and he doesn't have to explain himself to us or to anybody. And that's exactly the same theme that's expressed in the book of Job, when Yahweh at the end of the book of Job comes out of the whirlwind and gives the long poetic speech about, where were you when I laid out the constellations? Can you remove a star from the Pleiades and change Orion? Or I don't remember the exact words, but basically along those lines, right? Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I am who I am. I have my reasons. I've been around for a lot longer than you have. That sounds almost condescending. I've been around for a long time, so I've built up a lot of wisdom in my infinite years, in my outside of space and time years, and I have my reasons for doing things. I am who I am, and I don't need to give din and cheshbon. I don't need to explain myself to anybody. So those three ideas are related: the Akedat Yitzhak, the sacrifice of Isaac, the main theme, the true main theme of the book of Job, which is not why do good people have bad things happen to them, but it's again this idea of Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, that the Job didn't understand why Yahweh was doing what he was doing to him, but he had enough love, he had total love and faith in Yahweh that he never broke off connection with him. He never cursed him. And this phrase here, I am who I am. I am who I am. I've been around for a long time, and I don't have to explain why I do what I do to you or to anybody else. Okay. So we did get the book of Job in the end. And let's go now back to Leviticus chapter 21. And I totally forgot how we got onto that track, but it doesn't matter. Oh, right. Yes, I do remember now. Of course. We were talking about this idea here of why second. Verse 5. Right. Why the Torah is asking the Cohanim, here specifically the Cohanim, not to self-mutilate upon the death of a loved one. Because to self-mutilate on the death of a loved one would be the same as Abraham saying, no, God, I'm not going to sacrifice Isaac, or Job saying, or Job cursing God, or people saying, or people not believing that God is who he is. Because this very idea here, as we said, and this is how we got off into our very non-tangential tangent, expresses the idea not of a loving, wise God, but rather the idea of a mean, cruel, petty, and vindictive God that needs his anger appeased by seeing his human servants suffer. That's the only thing that, it's almost like, I don't know, let's say I don't know where I come up with all these analogies, but let's say you had a serial killer who broke into your house, God forbid. I mean, this can happen in the United States these days, maybe now and not with Trump being in office, but if Kamala got in office, that would definitely be happening. But let's say a serial killer breaks into your house and he wants to kill you, and instead you say, no, just here, I'm going to put on a horror movie, and maybe that'll satisfy your bloodlust. So that's kind of the idea. By maybe if I gash myself, it'll satisfy the cruel God with a lowercase g's bloodlust. Or if I sacrifice my child to you, it'll satisfy your bloodlust. That's the idea of the God that's being expressed by people who self-mutilate in response to the death of a loved one, because it's essentially saying that Yahweh is cruel. He killed this person off. It's showing a lack of faith in Yahweh. It's showing a lack of belief in that whatever Yahweh does, even though we don't understand it, and it's very painful at times, has his reasons for doing things. Self-mutilation, it does not express that love and faith in Yahweh for bringing upon the death of a loved one. But if we have love and faith in Yahweh, I have a friend here in the community who just lost his brother, and he said something very interesting to me today. And I'll probably go visit him later. Really, really super nice and special guy. And he said to me, we were talking in the Beit Knesset today, and he said, within the sadness, there's a certain happiness. There's a certain simcha. And what did he mean by that? He explained it. And he said that he realizes that although he's very sad that he's going to miss his brother, and I'm paraphrasing him here, that he knows that it was time for him to move on to the next stage. And there were other happy moments in his mourning period. And that can only come from belief, true belief, a personal connection with a God who he believes and who we believe is a kind and merciful God, and is not out to get us, and is only out to help us and do amazingly good things for us. And yes, he does painful things to us, such as take away loved ones from us, and we don't understand, especially when it's happening. We don't understand why, maybe. But if we truly have faith in Yahweh, then even during those times of pain and suffering and potential crisis in faith, we can see that there's a reason. We can get glimpses of the fact that there's a reason that Yahweh is doing what he's doing. And even if we don't understand the reasons, that we know he's a kind and merciful God who has his reasons for doing what he does. He is who he is. He does what he does because he has his reasons, because he's been around for a long time and knows what he's doing. Okay. Let's go on to, maybe I'll tell this to my friend tonight when I meet him. Okay. Verse 6. I just want to remember this verse. It's 21:5. Okay, verse 6. Kedoshim i'u le'Elohechem. So remember, we said that Leviticus chapters 17 through 26 are called by the secular scholars the holiness code, because we have a repetition often of this phrase of "you shall be holy because I am holy." In this case, you shall be holy to your God. Not you shall, they shall be holy to their God. Who is the they? The Cohanim, the priests. V'lo halalu shem Elohehem, and they shall not profane the name of their God. And remember, we said in the Torah the word profane, or really the true meaning of the word profane is not curse out or something like that. It's not profanity. Profane means make common that which is special. So if I were on, let's say I were a Hindu, and I don't know what the special Hindu holiday is, Diwali. And on Diwali, I decided I'm going to dress up like a bum, play video games, and then meet my friends at McDonald's later on in the afternoon. That, if I were a Hindu, that would be profaning the holy with a lowercase h. I'm not a Hindu. That's the idea of profaning something. It's not that playing video games and going to McDonald's is anything, is anything depraved or anything disgusting. I mean, I don't go to McDonald's myself, but it's not something horrible. It's just the kind of thing you would do on a regular day, not on a holy day. And that's the idea here of not profaning the name of God. Just don't turn it into another name. Don't turn Yahweh into Bob and Jack and Joe and Jill. Ki et ishe Yahweh lechem Elohim him makrivim hayu kodesh. Because why should they not profane the name of God? Because they bring the fire offerings. They offer the fire offerings. I shouldn't say the fire offerings. They offer the fire, the Ishe Yahweh. I mean, it just says the fire things of Yahweh. Okay, we'll go with fire offerings. The fire offerings of Yahweh, lechem Elohim, the food of their God. They offer Ayu Kodesh, and so they should be holy, right? They bring God his food, figuratively speaking. Our God Yahweh doesn't eat. That's why all of the parts of the sacrifice are either burnt on the altar. I'm talking about the meat, not the blood, or either burnt on the altar, or they are given to the Cohanim, or they're given in some sacrifices we saw when we studied the beginning of the book of Leviticus to the person who brings the sacrifice. And in certain cases, they are fully burnt on the altar, or in certain cases, parts of the animal are brought out to the are thrown on the dung heap, etc. But for the most part, the food of God is eaten by either the person who brings the sacrifice, or let's start from the top down, from either the Kohen, or it's either consumed on the altar, meaning it's burnt on the altar completely. It's given to the Kohen, or it's given to the person who brings the sacrifice. So when we say the food of God, and there's a phrase that repeats itself often in the Torah, which is reach nichoach, usually translated as sweet-smelling scent, the idea that these sacrifices are sweet-smelling scent to Yahweh. When this barbecue is taking place in his house, so think of, it's like in his backyard, we're doing like, everyone's doing like a perpetual barbecue back there. It's like everyone's coming over from the neighborhood and grilling in Yahweh's backyard, and he's smelling all this stuff up in heaven, and he's saying, "Wow, these people really, really love me because they're bringing me the best meat." Now, I'm a vegetarian, but but uh, you know, well, we won't get into the whole vegetarian thing right now, but people do eat meat, and I know that even as a vegetarian, I've been a vegetarian for decades now. That even if I'm driving in my car and I pass by a barbecue, it's a very tempting smell. I have to say, I, I don't want to go down the whole route of vegetarianism. Why it doesn't matter. The point is that that is the food that Yahweh likes. He knows that his people are bringing him the top choice meats from their first and their best animals from their flocks and from their herds. And when he smells the scent of these burning meats, he knows that his people love him because they're bringing him this top notch barbecue, basically. Okay, and then it says in response that that in response he will be amenable to them, or they will find favor in his eyes. It's often translated as, not a good translation, but that's the way they usually translate it. Okay. No, it's not lechem panim. Challengers of blindness. Lechem panim is something else. Lechem panim is the showbread, and that is not the meat sacrifices. That is inside the holy area, the mikdash. When you walk inside the holy area, inside the tent of meeting, then you first come to the holy area, then come to the holy of holies. When you walk inside the holy area, you're walking east to west. And on the left side, you're going to have the menorah. On the right, in front of you, you're going to have the incense altar. And on the right of you, you're going to have the showbread altar, where 12 loaves of bread are sit to rest. So no, when it says here the lechem Elohim, it clearly says here Ishei Yahweh, the fire offerings, or the things that are brought that are grilled, the things that are put to the fire of Yahweh, which is the food of their God. So it's clearly talking about the meat sacrifices in the altar out in the courtyard, not talking about the showbread, the lechem panim. Okay, let's go on. Verse 7. So, how are the Cohanim to be holy? Isha zona v'halala lo yikahu wa isha girusha mi isha lo yikahu. And let's stop right there because it's etnach. That's a semicolon. So a prostitute, a woman who's a prostitute, and a halala. We'll talk about what that means in a second. Here they translate it as a defiled woman, a profaned woman. Lo yikhu. So you shall not marry a prostitute and a defiled woman, whatever that means. We'll get some insight into that in a second. Isha grusha me isha lo yikahu. And a woman who's divorced from her husband, from her man, they shall not take as a wife. Ki kadosh hu le'elohav, because he is holy. The Kohen is holy to his God. So beyond not self-mutilating for their dead kin, they also are not supposed to marry a prostitute, a profaned or a defiled woman, whatever that means. We'll talk about it in a second, and a divorced woman. So what is left? Well, what's left is a woman who's never been married, and an almanah, a widowed woman. So we see here, that there is a hierarchy of women, of the states of women. Sorry if that doesn't sound, very politically correct in this day and age, but the Torah clearly has a hierarchy of the status of women. So the lowest class is a prostitute. The next would be a halala, would be a defiled woman. We'll talk about that in a second. And next would be a divorced woman. So divorced woman, a woman is allowed to get divorced, or a man is allowed to divorce a woman. The sefer kritut, basically with a letter of divorce. But a woman who's divorced is considered kind of like, sorry to say, is considered like damaged goods. Doesn't mean she can't get remarried. Doesn't mean she's not a potentially very, very good woman. But a Kohen who's supposed to have this extra level of holiness is not supposed to marry a woman who's tainted with a history of divorce. That's the way it is. So what's less reviled is maybe too strong a word, but what is less we'll just go with reviled. No, reviled is too strong a word. So maybe the zonah is reviled, the chala maybe less so, the grusha is tainted. So what's less tainted? We don't see almanah. Why is an almanah not considered as a woman who's an almanah? I'm sorry, almanah is a widow, not considered as tainted as one who's divorced? Because in the case of being divorced, the implication there is, well, she something caused her husband to get rid of her. May not always be the case, but that's the implication here. But with a woman, she didn't do anything wrong. Her husband died. Her husband didn't say, "Get enough of you, woman, out of my house. I can't take it any longer." Her husband died, so that is not forbidden in this list here. Let's go on, and then we'll talk. Then we'll get some commentary. Okay, verse 8. V'ki dashto ki et lechem Elohecha hu makriv, and you shall keep him holy. You shall make sure he's holy, because he brings the food to your God. He brings food to your God. He offers food to your God. Okay. Kadosh lach, ki kadosh ani Yahweh mekadishchem. So he shall be holy, or he shall therefore be holy to you. Ki kadosh ani Yahweh mekadishchem, because I, Yahweh, the one who makes you holy, am myself holy. So there's a bit to unpack there, but the basic idea that is being expressed is that by the Kohen not marrying these women with tainted pasts, that is the way they stay holy. And v'kidashto, you shall. This is a it's essentially a command. V'kidashto, you shall make him holy. You shall keep him holy. Who's the you that it's speaking to? Maybe a bit unclear, but I would say it's either speaking to Moses, really to the people of Israel, to make sure that this law is enforced. Okay, speaking as a generality to the people of Israel. Okay, because he brings forth the food of your God. Who's the your God? It's in the singular. Elohecha doesn't mean all of your gods, but the Torah really, once you get into biblical Hebrew, you'll see that the Torah is not consistent in either number or gender. So it can switch back and forth between number, and not much is meant by it. It's just expressing it in a slightly different way. So again, it's really speaking about all of the people of Israel, maybe as a unit. Okay. And again, Kodesh Yelach, he shall be holy to you. Who's the you? Again, I think the implication here is to the people of Israel. Kadosh ani Yahweh mikadishchem, because I, Yahweh, am holy. I, Yahweh, who makes you holy, am myself holy. So only someone who is holy, because I, Yahweh, am holy, can I make you holy. In other words, holiness can only be passed on from something that's already holy, is the implication there. Okay, bat ish kohen kitahel is not. So the daughter of a priest, literally a priest man, that begins to either literally it means that begins to be a prostitute, that prostitutes herself, but by implication, it could mean just begins to act like a slut, begins to become promiscuous, but literally means a prostitute. We can discuss whether it also includes someone who's just sleeping around. Et aviha hi michalelet. She has profaned her father. So her father is supposed to be holy. So kadosh and halal or chol are opposites of each other. Kadosh means holy, separated, set apart, whereas halal means common, not set apart, just average. So again, the example that I like to give is that a day that's chol, as we even say in modern Hebrew, yom chol. It just means an average day, a Monday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday. What is a holy day? Kadosh is Shabbat. It's a Saturday. That's the difference. Kadosh is a special day. A day that's a halal or chol, it's not that it's a bad day. It's not a disgusting, horrible, hideous day. It's just an average day. And what Yahweh doesn't like is when you take that which is special, we spoke about this above, and make it into something average. So if a Hindu spends his Diwali instead of at the Hindu temple, when I used to live back in Queens, New York, there was a huge Hindu temple. And we used to go there and eat nice Indian food there. At any rate, neither here nor there. If on Diwali a Hindu spends his holy day not at the Hindu temple praying to his lowercase God, which are literally idols. If you've ever been to a Hindu temple, it's really disgusting. But instead, plays video games and then goes with his friends to McDonald's, then he has, as a Hindu, made the holy into the profane. It's not that there's anything wrong with going to playing video games and eating at McDonald's. I personally don't do any of that stuff myself, but it's an average thing that people do. But you don't do that on the holy day. You don't do it on a holy day. And that's the idea here, that if the daughter of a Kohen has started to prostitute herself, she's taken something that is holy. The Kohen is holy. He's not just, he has a level of holiness that's above and beyond the average Israelite. All of Israel is meant to be holy, but the Kohen are supposed to be kadosh kadoshim, holy within holy, or holy of holies. They are held to a higher standard of holiness. Why? Because they bring the fire offerings, they bring the food of Yahweh. They are the ones who serve Yahweh his food. So imagine, someone who works in the White House would have to be held to a higher standard, in theory, right? Let's say the person who, I don't know, the chief of staff of Donald Trump, I think he chose his chief of staff, I think it's some chick, woman. And so that person would be expected to be held to a higher standard than just, an average person, okay? Because she's working close to the president of the United States. So it's the same idea here, that the Kohen is expected to be held to a higher standard because he is working in close proximity to Yahweh, to the Kavod Yahweh, the glory of Yahweh, which we've spoken about before. He's serving, quote unquote, serving Yahweh his quote unquote food. Okay. So what happens to the daughter of a Kohen? So if the daughter of a Kohen starts to prostitute herself, she's now turned this holy of holy Kohen. This Kohen is supposed to stick to a special level of holiness into just another average person. She's profaned him. She's made him just like an average person. Okay. What happens to her? Ba'ish Yisaref. She shall be burnt in fire. Death by fire. That is punishment for a Bat Kohen who acts like a slut. And lest it seem too harsh. Yeah, I know. It was just an analogy, Mariana McDonough. And lest it seem too harsh, I point you to one of the great gurus of our modern times, and that's Al Bundy. So I went through a number of Married with Children phases. I think it's a brilliant show and hilarious. And we know that Kelly was a slut, basically, at least according to Bud and basically everyone else in the family. She was, in theory, a slut. But what would happen, and by going around sleeping around with all the neighborhood, it's not clear she really did. It just kind of like a second, please. Phone call. Get rid of that for a second. But that was the reputation she had. So whatever. I think the show is kind of implies that she really was a lot more prude than she was portrayed to be in the show. But that's neither here nor there. The point is that she was an embarrassment. She was a shame to her father, to Al, who was a very manly man, right? Very prideful. She shamed her father Al by his daughter, by knowing that his daughter was sleeping with the whole neighborhood and the whole school. So what would Al do when one of Kelly's boyfriends came over to the house? Or let's say Al came home and Kelly was making out on the couch with one of her boyfriends, right? What would Al do if you were a fan of the show? He would basically he basically kicked the kid's ass, right? I remember there's one where he grabs him and then bangs his head against the wall, and then as he's going out the door, bangs his head against the door, and then throws him out to the street because she was causing shame to her father. If you have a daughter who is sleeping around, you are disgraced. You are disgraced to your father. We saw this concept actually a lot in Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20, that by revealing the nakedness of such and such, let's say revealing the nakedness, I think it was, of your father's wife, even if it's not your mother, if you have relations with your father's wife, you're in a sense revealing his nakedness. You're causing shame to your father by having sex with your father's wife. So if your daughter is a slut, then she is causing shame to you. She's causing shame to her father. And it's bad enough if it's a regular person within Israel, and there's another commandment in the Torah which we'll get to, which is the Lo tihye kadisha bivnot Yisrael. There should not be a prostitute or holy prostitute. Prostitute will go with among the daughters of Israel, but this is especially speaking about the Cohanim. They're held to a higher standard of holiness because they are the ones who are working in close proximity with Yahweh, the ones serving the food, preparing and serving the food to Yahweh, to the king, and the King of Kings. And so if the daughter is a slut, then she is burnt to expunge, to burn out, to bi'at et harav mi'Yisrael, to expunge that shame and that evil from the Cohanim, then she is burnt to death in fire. And we actually see this. I won't go to it right now, but in Exodus, let's go to it very briefly, but just in the English, in Genesis chapter 35, if I'm not mistaken. So we see Judah. No, it's after this. 5. Whoa, what's this number? 36. No. No, it's before this. I can't find it right now. It's around there somewhere. But at any rate, we see that when Judah finds out that his daughter-in-law is acting as a prostitute, there's a whole story going on there. But when he finds out that his daughter-in-law is acting as a prostitute, he says, "Bring her out to be burnt to death." And then it turns out that he was the one who had sex with her and whatever. There's a whole story going on there, if you remember, with the case of Er and Onan. But we're not going to get into it right now because we'll get off too much on a tangent. But the point is, the point I want to make there is that we saw that before. Now, Yehuda was not a Kohen. There was no nation of Israel per se at that point. Right? There had not been organized into Kohanim. That only came with the giving of the Torah, or maybe even the building of the Mishkan. So with the giving of the Torah. But even there was this idea that if your daughter shames you, defiles you, profanes you by going around acting like a slut or literally being a prostitute, then the proper punishment is that she should be burnt in fire. That's the only way to expunge the shame and the evil that such a thing causes. Okay, let's get a little commentary. We'll go to our buddy Robert Alter. See what he has to say. Let's see. I think we got up to their baldness. Okay, so here we're talking about verse 5. About no self-mutilation as part of mourning rituals. Mourning, mourning, not mourning rituals like not me, but like if I were a tech bro out in San Francisco, like doing my ice bath at 4 a.m. and then having my cafe latte watte schmate and reading the I don't know, the New York Times, whatever. Not that kind of mourning ritual. The mourning, mourning, for the dead ritual that involves self-mutilation. So this is what Robert Alter says. All of these acts are pagan rites of mourning that must be avoided. So I think, again, that so many people point this out, so many commentators point out that these are pagan rites of mourning, and it's true, but they don't explain why these are pagan rites of mourning. So we went into that, my explanation of it, and I think it's on target. But right, it's because why would people self-mutilate? Because they think of their false god as cruel and mean and despising human beings, that and an angry god that must be appeased. I remember I did see the movie, I think, but I remember my parents always used to love this movie when I was growing up. They would put on every so often, called The Gods Must Be Angry, I think it's called. It was called The Gods Must Be Crazy. I don't know. I can't remember. Gods Must Be Angry? Hold on. Let me look it up for a second. The Gods Must Be Crazy, I think it's called, actually. So forget it then. Gods Must. Coke bottle falls from the sky or something like that? No, not Spotlight Search. The Gods Must. Yeah, The Gods Must Be Crazy. That was it. I should watch it again. Okay. Anywho, so not The Gods Must Be Angry, but okay, let's go before I get off on more tangents. There are other pagan gestures of mourning, as attested, for example, in Ugaritic texts, that are permitted to the Israelites, such as putting on. I was going to mention. So, what are quote unquote kosher forms of mourning? Because we do see mourning rituals throughout Israel. The two most common are the ripping of the beged, the ripping of the garment, and the putting of ashes on the head, sitting on the floor with sackcloth. Okay, so just putting ashes on the head and donning sackcloth. Those are two of the common ones. Again, there are other ones as well. Other ones that are mentioned are ripping clothing is very common, and the other one is lifrom at the rosh, which is usually understood as messing up your hair or letting your hair down. At any rate, presumably the acts stipulated here are prohibited because they entail disfiguring some part of the body. Okay, and that's what we spoke about. Okay, God's bread. As elsewhere, lechem is a cynic doche for food. So bread literally means, lechem literally means bread, but by extension, it means food. Okay. So here we get to our verse that we just read. No, not the one we just read, but before it. So Isha zonach v'chalala. So let's first of all see how Robert Alter translates this one. So 7. So woman degraded as a whore, they shall not take it as a wife. And a woman divorced from her husband, they shall not take as a wife, for he is holy to his God, and you shall deem him holy, for he brings forward God's bread. He shall be holy for you, for I Yahweh, who hallows you, am holy. Okay, so it's interesting. It's actually a very interesting translation. So he's basically translating this as a phrase, zonah v'chalala, not as two different types. So often, chalala is considered a woman. Well, in rabbinical Judaism, it's considered a woman. Chalala is, I can't remember. I'll have to look it up. But at any rate, these are considered two different statuses, a zonah and a chalala. But here Robert Alter is translating it as a single phrase. So he's translating that as a woman degraded as a whore. So he's basically saying there are only two statuses. So the rabbis usually interpret this as a prostitute, a profaned woman, and a divorced woman. But Robert Alter, very interestingly, is translating it as only two statuses and saying that these two words, zonah v'chalala, mean a woman who's profaned as a prostitute. And then the other status is a divorced woman. All right, so let's get his explanation here. So, woman degraded as a whore. This translation follows the proposal of many modern scholars that zonah wa halala, literally whore and degraded one, is a hen. Oh God, here he goes again. We'll have to look this word up. Hendidadis. All right, we'll look it up. Used to convey the idea of the intrinsically degraded condition of the whore. Milgram's proposal that halala means raped woman rests on rather flimsy philological evidence. Note that in verse 9, the same two roots are put together, this time as a verb and an infinitive, and we'll get to that. Tachel is not. Okay. Degrade herself in whoring, strongly suggesting that they are a fixed collocation rather than designating two different possibilities. Okay. And then he also says, for he is holy. The Hebrew, like this translation, slips from the plural for all priests to the singular for the individual priest. As we mentioned, and Robert Alter is pointing out this out here, is that biblical Hebrew often switches number and often switches gender. So we can go from singular to plural, back to singular to plural, and nothing much is to be thought of it. It's just expressing itself in that way. Okay, so he's saying something very interesting here. And let's just look up this word. I already get it from the context, what it means. Well, let's get up anyway. He always uses these technical terms like cynic doche. So hendiatus. One more time. The expression of a single idea by two words connected with and, e.g., nice and warm, when one could be used to modify the other as nicely warm. Okay, so we get the idea. So that's what he's saying. Zonah v'chalala means a defiled as a prostitute. And his proof is that in verse 8, okay, so he sees the words used together, and clearly here, ubat ish kohen ki techel is not that will the daughter of a man who is a kohen, a priest man, who shall profane herself by prostituting herself. And here he sees the two words are clearly connected, so he's saying that that implies also that they're connected here, and that these are not two different statuses, that this is actually the same thing. Very, very interesting. I think he makes a very, very good point. Okay. So we read up to there. Verse 8. Okay. So verse 8 is, let's just read verse 8 again, and I'll just translate directly into English. And you shall ensure that he is holy, speaking about the priest. Because he brings the food of your God, he brings forth the food of your God. Holy shall he be to you, for you, because I am holy. I, Yahweh, who makes you holy, am myself holy. Okay, so what does Robert Alter have to say about that one? The verbal motif central to the holiness code is here redoubled as the text concentrates on the priests, the very heart of the holiness that is to extend to the entire people. So again, he's making a very important point here. Let's move around my position here. And that point is, as we said, we were saying it before, essentially, that while all of the people of Israel are kadosh, are holy, the priests are in a sense kodesh kodeshim, they're holy of holies. Okay, the very heart of holiness that is to extend to the entire people. So the priests have a special level of holiness, as we see from these laws here. They're not allowed to become ritually impure for anyone but the nearest of their kin. They're not allowed to carry out these pagan mourning rituals. They are not allowed to marry a prostitute or a divorced woman. They are not, and if their daughter sleeps around, then that daughter is to be burnt by fire. So we see that the priests are held to a special level of holiness. And that's essentially what this part of Leviticus 21 is dealing with. From verse 1 down to verse 9. Okay, we'll go on. Go for another half an hour or so. Any questions, any comments? Anybody before we go on? Okay, let me take a break for a minute. I'll put up a song and we'll be right back. I just need to drink a little water and stretch. Be right back.
Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Cuando el rey Nimrod al campo salía, vino en el cielo y en la estrellería, miré todos los Los meses quería, ia caminando por campos en viñas, y a su marido no le descubría, topó una mara libarería. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel.
Okay, we're back. Welcome back to the study. We'll go for about another half an hour or so. Hope you're enjoying the study. And so we're in Leviticus chapter 21. And we're up to verse 10. We're up to verse 10. And verse 10 is now going to deal with if the Cohanim if Israel is holy and the Cohanim are the Holy of Holies, then now we're going to deal with the Kohen Gadol, who's maybe the Holy of Holies. Or maybe Israel is just profane and the Kohanim are holy, and the Kohen Gadol, the chief priest, the high priest, is the Holy of Holies. However you want to think of it. So the laws for the Kohen Gadol, for the high priest, are going to be even more restrictive, because he is the single person that wears the special clothing of the Kohanim, that carries the Urim V'Tumim, the only person who enters into the Holy of Holy areas on Yom Kippurim, as we saw in Leviticus chapter 16, which is where Yahweh actually, quote unquote, lives. The glory, the Kavod Yahweh lives on the Ark cover, on the Kaporet of the Ark of the Covenant. So the Kohen Gadol is going to be held to the highest standards. And let's get into that. So we're in Leviticus chapter 21, verse 10. With a Kohen Gadol, how? Let's make the screen a little bit darker here. It's easier to see. והכהן הגדול מאחיו, אשר יוצק על ראשו שמן המשחה. Let's translate up to there. So the chief priest, the high priest from among his brothers, the chief priest from among his brothers, אשר יוצק על ראשו שמן המשחה, upon whose head is poured the anointing oil. We know when the high priest is anointed. We saw this explicitly in Leviticus 10. No, 10 was Dotan and Avion. Yeah, around there. At any rate, so the anointing oil is poured upon his head, umile et yado, and takes his role, or takes up his office, l'bosh et habigadim, wearing the clothing, and that means the special clothing. The special clothing of the Kohen Gadol, which we learned about back in Exodus, which consists of, so we have the, I'm not going to remember all of them. Michnas, and then on top of it the ketonet, and then the ma'il, and then the ephod, and then on the ephod is the choshen mishpat, and in the choshen mishpat somewhere is the urim v'tumim, and then he has the mitznefet, and then he has the tzitz, and then he has the chagurah, the belt around the sash. So he has all these special clothes that only the Kohen Gadol wears, that only the chief priest wears. So Rosho, so what are his rules? Rosho lo yifra. Ubigadao lo yifrom. So there are a number of different ways to translate this, and this is not 100% clear. Often it's understood as he shall not let his hair grow long or let his hair loose, and he shall not allow his clothes to get ragged. Okay, let's see how we're going to get a number. This is one of these phrases or verses that are going to be that no one knows exactly how to translate. So we're going to get a number of different translations. Let's check Robert Alter's first. So this is verse 10. Make this a bit bigger. See? And the priest exalted over his brothers on whose head the anointing oil has been poured and who has been installed to wear the garments shall not dishevel his hair nor rip his garments. Okay. And there's a comment on that. We'll check in a second. Now let's look at, let's say this again. Okay. Now let's look at Everett Fox and see his translation. So I'm going to guess it's going to be around page 100 or so. Nope. 125. A little bit more. Close enough. All right. So Leviticus 21:10. So Everett Fox is some translation. Now the priest that is greater than his brothers, who has poured on his head the oil of anointing and has been mandated to dress in the garments, his head he is not to bear, his garments he is not to tear. Okay, so Everett Fox's head he is not to bear, his garments he is not to tear. And it's very interesting. He makes this, I believe, intentionally to rhyme, because in the Hebrew is not into rhyming. Hebrew poetry is not into rhyming at all, but it is into words that sound similar. And here we have Rosho lo yifrav ubigadav lo yifrom. So brilliant translation. So again, Everett Fox's his head he's not to bear, his garments he's not to tear. And Robert Alter shall not dishevel his hair and not rip his garments. So they're both agreeing on the rip his garments, but Robert Alter says not dishevel his hair, whereas Everett Fox says not bare his hair. In other words, not uncover his hair. Let's get one or two more translations on that one. Let's look at the NIV. NIV. Actually, let's get to verse 10. NIV. So must not let his hair become unkempt or tear his clothes. So he's agreeing with Robert Alter, dishevel, and not agreeing with Everett Fox, to bear. But if we go to this verse, actually, it's a comment here, or not uncover his head. So there you go. So now that one in the footnote is saying maybe agreeing with Everett Fox. So those are I guess the two possibilities. Let's look at again verse 10. And let's go to, what is it? Parallel translations, I believe, parallel. And we'll get a bunch of different translations. So here we have we read the NIV, the NLV, which I believe is an updated version of the King James. So he must never leave his hair uncombed. or tear his clothing. So he's agreeing with the disheveled. So they all have tear his clothing. Shall not let the hair of his head hang loose. We used to learn in yeshiva grow long, not allow his hair to grow long. He can't be like a teenager hanging out down by the skate park or something like that with the long hair. Let his hair hang loose or tear his garments. Not uncover his head nor rend his clothes. Not uncover his head nor tear his clothes. So they all agree on tear his clothes, but we're getting two for the the first part. So it's either uncover or dishevel his hair. See if there's any others. No, that's pretty much it. Uncover, tear, dishevel. So it's either uncover or dishevel. And the fact that we have those two different translations, even in two excellent translators such as Everett Fox and Robert Alter, implies that nobody really 100% knows what that means. Let's look at the commentary on verse 10. So the garments, though the Hebrew uses the general term for garments, the obvious reference is to the priestly vestments worn in the cult, right? Okay, so that's maybe an obvious point, or should be an obvious point, maybe it's not so much, that he shouldn't wear, should not rip his garments. We're not just talking about, his t-shirt and jeans when he's walking around, going to the marketplace. If the Kohen Gadol ever dressed in anything else, I don't know. But we're talking about the special clothing, the special clothing of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest. He should not rip them. Obviously not on purpose. He's not going to do it unless he's really a lunatic. Some pretty lunatic Kohen Gadols later on. But I guess this is saying that if his garments are intentionally ripped, or maybe it's also speaking about, this actually might be speaking about mourning rituals, to be honest. Yeah, this actually, I think, is speaking about mourning rituals per se. Okay. I'm surprised none of the commentaries mention it. Wait a second. Does Robert Alter mention that? Oh, he does. Gestures of mourning permitted for those who are not the high priest. The verb chosen for rip, param, neatly alliterates with para dishevel. So, okay, we said that when we spoke about Everett Fox's translation. Okay, yes, so these are mourning rituals. So the average person, even the Kohen, is allowed to do these mourning rituals. He's allowed to dishevel his hair or uncover his hair, and he's allowed to rip his clothing. Of course, that's what it's mourning rituals, right? It should have been obvious. But he's allowed to rip his clothing. Right? We mentioned before that these are some of the common mourning rituals we see in the Tanakh. And the regular Kohen is allowed to do these things. So the regular Kohen is not allowed to gash himself. He's not allowed to make bald spots in his hair. He's not allowed to pull out his hair, and he's not allowed to pull out his beard, parts of his beard. But he is allowed to do these things. Even, I'm assuming the implication is, even if he's wearing his regular Kohen clothes, which is basically a tunic, he's allowed to rip those clothes, and he's allowed to uncover. He's also wearing a turban, just a regular turban. So he's allowed to uncover his hair or dishevel his hair, maybe uncover and then mess up his hair. And he's even allowed to rip his clothing. That's for regular Kohen. But the Kohen Gadol, and these are acceptable mourning rituals in the Torah. These are acceptable because there's no self-mutilation going on. But the Kohen Gadol is not even allowed to do this. He's not even allowed to do these regular mourning rituals because he can't rip the holy clothes that he's wearing, the special clothes of the Kohen Gadol, and maybe because he can't take off his mitznefet, he can't take off his special turban if he's wearing the clothes of the Kohen Gadol. So maybe that gives insight into the fact that lifrom, which we saw translated alternatively in the Hebrew, yifra, maybe this implies maybe it implies that the translation of disheveled is not the correct one, and that the translation of making his hair bare, bearing his hair, in other words, taking off his hat, is the correct one, because then it would make sense. Then in both cases, it would be speaking about the clothes of. I think that makes sense. It's making sense to me. Oh, I should write that up when I finally get together my entire commentary on the Torah. Of course, it. I won't say of course, but now it seems to make sense. Because what's the context here? The context is the wearing of these special garments. So let's translate this whole verse again and see how the whole thing fits. So the Kohen who is exalted above or is greater than his brothers, upon whose head is poured the anointing oil, and takes upon the role or takes upon the office, which includes of Lilbosh et habigadim, which includes dressing or wearing the special garments of the Kohen. Literally just says the clothes, but the context there is the special garments of the clothing. So then it would make sense that these rules here have to do with anything that would affect that clothing. So the Rosho lo yifra, so shall not bear his head, he shall not take his hat off, his turban, his mitznefet off. Ubigadav lo yifram, and he shall not rip his clothing. So this is having to deal with the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. And so I guess the better translation is to make his head bare, because he can't even take that hat off, because that is part of his uniform. He would be no longer dressed as the Kohen Gadol, and he always has to be, at least when he's in service, dressed as the Kohen Gadol. I guess you could say in the case of disheveled, in order to dishevel his hair, he first has to take off his hat. So maybe disheveled by extension, but lifra, para means like wild. Okay, I guess it can go either way. But the connection there is to the clothing. He can't either take off or dishevel his hair, take off his hat or dishevel his hair, because in either case he would have to take off his special turban, and then he would now no longer be dressed in the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. And that's the point there. That's the real point that's being spoken about, or that's being focused on there, is the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. Okay, we're going to go another maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then we're going to end. Verse 11, V'al kol nafshot met lo yavo la'aviv la'aviu. I'm sorry, lo yavo. Let's translate up to there, that first verselet. So for any dead person, he shall not approach. In other words, he's not allowed to be in the proximity of any dead body. We saw that in the case of the regular Kohen, he's not allowed to be in the proximity of any dead body except for his close of kin, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, his brother, his sister. Okay, unmarried sister. But for the Kohen Gadol, le'aviv limo lo itama, even for his mother and his father and his mother, he shall not become ritually impure. So he can't even really carry on the normal mourning rituals. In other words, come in proximity of the dead bodies of his own mother and father. That's how serious it is. That's how important it is that the Kohen Gadol, who is the Kadosh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies, goes into the Holy of Holies, and therefore I guess is the Holy of Holies. That's how important it is that he not come into a state of ritual impurity, that he not get the cooties by coming in proximity to the dead bodies of even his own mother and his father. Okay? Let's go on. Let's see if Robert Alter has anything on that. So the contamination of the corpse would be conveyed to him if he were to enter any enclosed space in which the corpse was without. We spoke about that earlier. We learned about that earlier in Leviticus. Doesn't just have to touch the dead body, even if he's in the same room or the same tent as a dead body, then a person acquires the cooties, acquires ritual impurity. Just think, if you were in the same room as a corpse, wouldn't like you start feeling like icky, like that ickiness is sticking to you? It's all very logical and common sense. People make this rabbinical Jews especially make this idea of ritual purity and impurity into this mystical, magical thing. It's not at all. It's just common sense, man. It's so simple and straightforward, honestly. Okay, the syntactic positioning of the two nouns at the beginning of the clause suggests not even for his father and for his mother, which is the way we translate it. Okay. Even for his father and his mother, he shall not come. And that's a very, it's Robert Alter is bringing that point out very nicely. Okay. Oops. Verse 12. Umin hamikdash lo yitze velo yhalel et mikdash Elohau. Ki nezer shemen mishchat Elohau alau ani Yahweh. And from the holy area, from the sanctuary, he shall not go out. Velo yichalel et mikdash Elohau, and he shall not defile. I'm sorry, not profane the sanctuary of his God, the holy place of his God. He nezer shemen mishchat Elohau alau, because the, let's see how to translate this. Verse 12. The mark. So nezer. No, this is a tough one to translate. Let's see how Robert Alter deals with that one. This word nezer, verse 12. So first of all, Everett Fox translates the whole thing as, from the holy shrine, he's not to go out, that he not profane the holy shrine of his God, for the sacred oil of anointing is upon him. So he's not really translating the word nezer directly. Let me just see for crown, consecration, separation, dedication. Okay. Let me just see for a second for myself. So nezer is a crown, really. That's the basic meaning of the word, the underlying meaning of the word. The term nezer primarily denotes a state of consecration or separation, often associated with a vow or special status before God. It is used to describe the physical crown worn by kings and priests, symbolizing their consecrated role. Additionally, it refers to a Nazirite vow, a special form of dedication to God involving abstinence from wine, not cutting one's hair, and avoiding contact with the dead. We'll get to that in the book of Numbers. So why isn't there a BDB on this? That's weird. Okay. Any rate. Oh, I must have. Second. There's the BDB. Okay, but let's read this. So, cultural and historical background in ancient Israel, the concept of consecration was central to religious life. The nezer represented a visible sign of one's dedication to God, whether through the physical crown of a king or a priest or the uncut hair of a Nazirite. The Nazirite vow, detailed in number 6, was a voluntary act of devotion, allowing any Israelite to live in a state of heightened holiness for a period. This vow was a way for individuals to express their commitment to God beyond the regular requirements of the law. So nezer is basically a crown. Okay, and we even see it used when it's describing the priestly garments. Let me just look at this for 1 second. Let's go to this, Exodus 39:30. So Yasu et tzitz nezer a kodesh. So the tzitz is I think they call the diadem, the plate. Nezer a kodesh. Okay, so they made the plate of the holy crown of pure gold and wrote upon it a writing. So this is okay. This is just fine. I don't want to get off track too much, but just for my own edification here, really. Yasu et tzitz nezer hakodesh. Zahav tahor v'yichtavu alav miktav pituchei chotem. I just want to check one more thing. Oops, I didn't mean to close that, but no big deal. Okay. That's the Nazarite vow, all of that. Number 6. So 2 Samuel, verse 10. Let's look at that for a second. I'm sorry, 2 Samuel 1:10, I should say. Okay, so this is talking about, let's look at this, 2 Samuel 1:10. So this is when the Amalekite comes. Okay, so an Amalekite, Saul requests this Amalekite youth to kill him because he's had enough. And then here in verse 10, so I stood, this is the Amalekite youth speaking, telling David, so I stood beside him and killed him because I knew that after he had fallen, he could not survive. And I took the crown that was on his head and the band on his arm and brought them here to my Lord. This is the Amalekite youth speaking this to David. David ends up killing this Amalekite youth for putting his hand, for killing the anointed one of Yahweh, who was Saul. At any rate, here we have the word crown that was on his head, talking about the crown that was on Saul's head. And in Hebrew, that indeed is the word that's used there is nezer. So Samuel 1:10. In Hebrew, okay, amod alau, wa'ah, amotehu, amotetu, ki yadati ki lo yechieh achrei niflo, wa'ekach hanezer asher al rosho, wa'etz'ada asher al zro'o, wa'aviem el adoni hena. So that's in Hebrew, and here we have the word nezer. Right here, hanezer. So there's the crown that was on, oh God, I changed positions, that was on Saul's head. That's a Amalekite youth after he kills Saul. He helps Saul fall on a sword, essentially. He takes the crown and then he brings it along with a bracelet to David to prove that he killed Saul, or it's basically an assisted suicide. Okay. All right, let's unwind a little bit. Very interesting. Just out of curiosity, what's this? 2 Kings 11. I think it's 11:12. One second. Okay, got it. All right, so let's now go back to Leviticus 21. We'll start wrapping up for today. Yeah, I'm going to wrap up now, actually. So Leviticus 21. Hebrew. Okay. So we saw that he cannot. Okay, so literally he cannot leave the holy area, the area of the tabernacle. And we'll talk about that, what that really means in a second. Ki nezer shemen mishchat Elohau allow, because the crown of the anointing oil of his God is upon him. It's the same phrase that we saw before, right? Shemen mishcha, up here, the anointing oil for here. The reason that he can't rip his clothing and take off his hat to dishevel his hair, and dishevel his hair. So here it seems like Nezer, the crown, that's being referred to figuratively is the oil, the anointing oil that's poured on his head. So when it's poured on his head, it's like a crown. It's on his head. So I think that's the idea that's being that the Torah is attempting to get across here. Nezer shemen yishchat Elohav, literally the crown of the anointing oil of his God. So the anointing oil, which is poured on his head, allow, is upon him or on top of him, over him, is like the crown. That is his crown. He doesn't have a crown. He has the mitznefet, he has the turban, but he doesn't have a crown per se. So that anointing oil is, in a sense, his crown, I believe, is what this verse is attempting to apply. Okay, let's look at verse 12. So he translates it as mark. The Hebrew nezer can also mean diadem, but its etymology indicates to be distinct, set apart, and the anointing oil is the priestly mark of distinction. Okay, he has a slightly different take on it. I'm not sure. After all we looked up right now, and nezer literally means crown. Nazir, yes, it does mean that the Nazir, the Nazarite, is set apart, but only that only set apart because of what he has to do, which kind of that acts as a crown. Okay. Anyway, I don't want to get too down the rabbit hole here. It's more for my own thinking. Okay. So we're going to stop here. Okay. So we're up to verse 13. We'll start in verse 13 next time. No, we can go through really quickly and get down. So, Behu isha bebituleha yikach. So he shall take only a virgin, to make a long story short. So the Kohen Gadol is only allowed to take a virgin. We saw that the irregular Kohen doesn't have to take a virgin because he can also take an almanah. He can take also a widow. But the Kohen Gadol, the chief priest, has to take a virgin. And here we have explicitly in verse 14, almanah ugrusha uhalala zona et ela lo yikach. Ki im bitula mi'amao yikach isha. I want to check something for myself afterwards, but I'll do that later. So a widow or a divorced woman, halala zona, and if we're going with Robert Alter's understanding of this, a prostitute who has defiled herself, these he shall not take as a wife, but rather only a bitula, only rather a virgin from among his people, yikach isha, he shall take as a wife. So the almanah, the difference here is the almanah. So the regular Kohen is not allowed to take a grusha, and a zonah is not allowed to take a divorced woman or a prostitute, but is allowed to take an almanah, is allowed to take a widow. But the Kohen Gadol is not even allowed to take a widow. He's holy of holies. So he must marry a virgin. An almanah is not an almanah of her own fault, unless she killed her husband, which I guess could happen. But in all seriousness, the husband died, and it's not her fault. She hasn't done anything on her part to cause her status, right? Her husband just, as an old history teacher, old social studies teacher of mine in the 9th grade, Mr. Barkov used to say, I was playing tennis with he was talking about how old he's getting and all his friends are dying. So he was saying, I was playing tennis with my friend the other day, and then the next week he just dropped dead. Okay, well, there's no fault of Mr. Barkov. Well, maybe it was. Maybe he shouldn't have been playing tennis with old men. But the point is that being a widow it can in no way be the fault of the woman. Being a gerusha, being a divorced woman, could be her fault, right? She takes two to tango, so she's obviously must be in most cases some cause of the divorce, but there's nothing wrong. She didn't do anything she didn't do anything wrong to become a widow. Her husband just up and died, and that's okay for Kohen, but for the Kohen Gadol, even so, it's not acceptable for the Kohen Gadol. Even if it's a woman who is a widow who did absolutely nothing intentionally to cause her status of being a widow, she's still forbidden to the Kohen Gadol. He can only take a bitula, a virgin, a woman who has never had vaginal relations with a man. Okay. ולא יחלל זרעו בעמו, כי אני יהוה מקדשו. And so he shall not profane, and again, profane means make that which is sanctified or special or holy into something that is average, something run-of-the-mill. So he shall not profane, make average his seed, his descendants, and in this case, Zar'o literally means his male descendants. Zera means Zera is seed. Zar'o means his seed. Seed means literally means the semen, the sperm, and so it's implying the male line, right? Because the sperm is coming out of the male. The Y chromosome goes to the male. So this is literally in this context implying the male line, because the Cohanim are of the male line. In fact, all of Israel their status is determined by the male line. That's we've spoken about many times. But he shall not defile his male seed. I'll even translate it as there, meaning his male descendants. Be'amav, among his people, ki ani Yahweh mikacho, because I'm Yahweh who makes him holy. So if he marries anyone who's a virgin, or who's not a virgin, if the Kohen Gadol marries anyone who's not a virgin, then his offspring, his male offspring in particular, will be defiled. And so if the status of being Kohen Gadol is passed down to to one of his sons, and that's the way succession as the Kohen Gadol usually occurred in ancient times. It even speaks about Aaron Ubanav, right? So it's passed down. The Kohen Gadol ostensibly would have one of his sons, his oldest son, ostensibly be the next Kohen Gadol. So if that oldest son is a product of a marriage that involved a non-virgin woman, a woman who is even by not her own fault tainted in one way or another, either a widow or a divorced woman or a prostitute, then he, in doing so, in bringing that offspring as the Kohen Gadol, he has now profaned, he's made regular, he's made average this special seed that is supposed to be the Holy of Holies, the continuation of the Holy of Holies, the high priest. Okay? Okay, and then we get into blemishes. So we can stop right there. Okay, so let me just mark down that we got up to 15. And next time we're going to start in verse 16. Okay. And we're going to end the study here. Hope you've enjoyed the study. I think it's been very interesting. This stuff absolutely fascinates me. I think the book of Leviticus is fascinating. It's very technical, which to me makes it even more fascinating if it's understood and studied correctly, as I've said so many times. And I hope you've enjoyed the study, is all I can say. Read the book of Leviticus on your own. We're going to end the study here. Thank you for joining. please spread the word about the study. Like, share, subscribe, all of that nice kind of stuff. And let's get the word out. I love doing these studies. I've started doing a lot of shorter form videos on the World Alliance of Qara'im YouTube channel. But I think it's very important to do these long, deep dives. So even if not as many people, one of my videos on the shorts, I haven't even checked lately. Maybe it's more, but one got 10,000 views the one where I visited the eastern gate of the Temple Mount. So these get nothing like 10,000 views, but I think it's still very important to have these deep dives into the Torah each week, and I'm really glad we're doing these. So thank you for joining us. This is Hakham Melech Ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, signing off, wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom, wherever you are, or a Shavua Tov, wherever you are in the world. Hope you have a great week, and Be'ezarat Yahweh, we will see you again next week. We'll go out with some music, as always, and we'll talk to you soon.
Avram Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Avram